The Renaissance era was host to some of the greatest technological developments in history. Some are still used today. The two inventions that I chose that summarize the era properly were the mechanical clock and the flush toilet. I chose this based on their impact on social, political, economic, and cultural structures. The first invention that I am covering is the mechanical clock because of its significant impact on history as a whole. Timekeeping as a whole dates back to the year 3500 BCE when Egyptians would use a gnomon, which is a vertical structure that sticks out of the ground, and as the day progresses, it casts a shadow on the ground. This was used for a while until people realized that this wasn't accurate enough. So, technically, a mechanical clock is any timekeeping device that measures time using an iterated process if it's consistent enough. Obviously, this makes it difficult to nail down a specific time for the mechanical clock's creation, but the first technical mechanical clock was the water clock. It was created in China during the 1500s. It kept time by measuring how much water would drop into a container. To see how much time had passed, you would simply see the marks on the side of the container, and it would tell you how much time had passed based on the water in the container. This presented a few problems, though, one of which being that the clock wouldn't work in a room that's temperature was 0 degrees. Also, it wasn't that accurate. Next in the evolution of the mechanical clock was the pendulum clock. The pendulum clock used pendulums to control how fast the clock would keep time. Back then, oscillation was a major flaw in the mechanical clock's design, and this was the solution or answer to how fast the menaged wheel would move. But this created a problem for a different group, the sailor. They needed a clock that wasn't reliant on weight because when they would travel on a boat, the boat would rock and throw off the weight. Therefore, it wouldn't be able to oscillate consistently enough to make it a mechanical clock. To fix this problem, the Royal Crown held a competition that was designed towards solving the problem for seafarers. This birthed the spring clock, which used a series of springs to keep the time. This worked so well that it lost 1 second per day, which, as you can imagine, was pretty big for sailors, seeing they needed time to create an accurate course. The next big step in the mechanical clock is quartz timekeeping, which is the standard in most clocks and watches today. In fact, Rolex is one of the only watches that doesn't use quartz timekeeping in their devices. Quartz itself is known as a piezoelectric material, so if you apply an electric field to it, it will move. So, apply this to a clock and you have an incredibly accurate timekeeping device. It works by placing a tiny quartz crystal into the watch and count how many times it oscillates. Believe it or not, this clock only loses 15 seconds per month. While this is incredible, it's not enough to determine a time for the world. So to set a standard for the world, we decided to create the atomic clock, which uses the atom cesium and then it counts how many times it oscillates at. This clock was so accurate that it showed us our own Earth's orbit varies from year to year. Back then, we used to measure how many seconds were in a year by using the Earth's orbit around the Sun, which was roughly 1/32 millionth of a year. Since the mechanical clock was created, we were able to have different luxuries in an advanced society. The mechanical clock made it possible for sailors to more accurately chart their journey. It made it possible to have a stock market. It allows us to more accurately know when to beat an event. The government uses timekeeping to accurately regulate their systems. Astrophysicists use it while researching in their respective field. The people aboard the ISS use it because no other clock would be able to function as well as the atomic clock. Rolex is probably one of the most recognized watches in today's culture. And it was also one of the only watch companies to survive the quartz revolution. The way they were able to survive this revolution was based on brand recognition. One of their notable achievements was the Oyster, which was the first fully waterproof watch. In fact, on October 1927, a woman named Mercedes Glietz attempted to swim across the massive body of water in Cape Grise, France. She was wearing the Oyster. Before the Rolex, people would use pocket watches, and usually wristwatches were worn by women, and they would be pretty inaccurate. So two men, Hans Wildorf and Alfred Davis, decided to jump into this market in 1905, and then birthed the Rolex. The next invention I chose was the flush toilet, Before the flush toilet, people would use chamber pots, and even before that, in ancient times, they wouldn't even have them in their homes. But in 1596, John Harrington invented the first flush toilet, which allowed water into the bowl to flush away whatever was in the bowl. But it wasn't until 1778 when Joseph Brand patented the practical water toilet in England. The thing that made it flush was the water closet on the back of the toilet, which is that big tank you see. The way it works is when the handle is pushed down, it pulls upon a chain that is connected to a flapper or a seal. The seal lifts and releases the tank water down the flush valve into the bowl. The water then goes down and through the main drain. Queen Elizabeth actually had a lot to do with the device becoming so widespread. She loved the device so much she decided to install them inside Buckingham Palace. But at first the device had issues with the air filtration system, so sewer air would leak into the royal palace. To fix this problem, Queen Elizabeth would place herbs and flowers that would mask the scent. This device made bathroom going so much more sanitary, which lowered the risk of illnesses. But a flaw with today's toilet is that it uses a lot of fresh water, which is becoming an issue because there isn't a lot of it today. The device, depending upon the model, uses 3.5 to 7 gallons per flush, but this is being solved with more water-saving toilets. Both these devices had major impacts upon the world, even past the Renaissance era. Although the mechanical clock has continued into other generations, the first well-working clock, the pendulum clock, was created during the Renaissance era, and even the flush toilet was first thought of and designed back in the Renaissance era. These two devices clearly changed the way we conducted our day-to-day routine, from the mechanical clock birthing 24-hour time. And it also allowed us to figure out that we don't go around the sun the same every year. And the toilet made bathroom going much more sanitary. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Nathan Don.